I want us to talk about task 1, edTPA. This is edTPA, Elementary Education Literacy with the Mathematics, task 4. And today I basically want to talk about task 1, that is planning for instruction and assessment. In this task 1, in general, we are supposed to submit 5 documents. That is part A, literacy context for learning information, of which it gives the assessor the basic information or the foundational information that is required as you are planning to go to execute your instructions. Now, the part B part, that is the lesson plans for learning segment, you are supposed to write at least 3 to 5 lesson plans. 3 to 5 lesson plans. Some of the students, they opt to just go with 3, of which is also okay, but it's the required number is 3 to 5. Then part C, that is instructional material. Instructional materials are materials that you are going to use in your lesson as you teach. Now, you are also required to submit part D, that is literacy assessment. You're also going to submit part D, that is literacy assessment. These are blank copies of assessments that you are going to give your students. All right, most of the students, they prefer, I recommend you give written assessment because it will be easier to analyze the data and even give the feedback to students. Part E, of which now it is going to be marked and you're going to be awarded marks on this part. Part E is literacy planning commentary. Now, you're going to write the commentary before you teach. Before you start teaching your sequenced lessons, please, you are supposed to plan before you go to class and teach. Part A, task 1, part A, of which we are going to look at the basic information of where you are teaching. You need to provide the assessor with the basic information about, so that he can understand the nature of students, the kind of students you are handling. So here you're just going to give general information here. You're going to list a lot of key aspects. For example, list any special features of your school or classroom setting. And here I recommend use classroom setting. Use classroom setting. Do you have, are you allowed to do co-teaching? Are you you give the percentage composition of the students, the way they are culturally diverse? So do you have an IEP student? Do you have SEND students? You need to highlight them here. Now let's go in this part. You need to provide information about the district or the school or the cooperating teacher requirement that you are supposed, that the school is subjecting you to use. For example, if you are teaching reading a storybook, does your district subject you to use a certain book while at a certain grade level? So you need to provide that information here. Then there is about the class features in this learning segment. Based on the lesson plan you have prepared, 3 to 5 lesson plans, provide us with information how much of, for example, in a week, how long are you interacting with your students? How long is your lesson? You need to provide us the key information here in this part 1. Then in the second part of here, you're supposed to give us, is there any ability grouping or tracking literacy that you are going to use? Yeah, if so, please, you are supposed to describe how it affects your classroom. You know you're going to teach. As you teach, how is it going to affect your teaching? You need to provide that information. Then you need to give us the textbook or the book that you're going to use, of course. Then you give us some of the resources. Are you going to use softwares, certain website that is allowed in your school? Then give us the average. Then about the students now. How many students are you handling? Give us the number. Which grade are you handling? Give us the number. Then this part, be careful as you feed this part, because it will affect the entire part of your edTPA writing. How many IEP students do you have? Then which support are you going to give them as you teach? Then do you have English language learners? How many do you have? Which support are you going to give them? As you plan, you need to have this in mind. The support that you're going to give to your student. Now, let's see. Do you have any other learning needs that you need to consider as you plan? If you have any, please list them here. It will be so helpful during during task 2, 3, and 4. Is lesson plan. Please make sure your lesson plan is well organized. Make sure it is well organized. For instance, now we said that we need 3 to 5 lesson plans. For example, in this case, this candidate was teaching students about story elements, and he was handling the magic of story elements. That was the title of the lesson. Now the central focus, as you state the central focus, make sure it is all the same in your sequenced lessons. In 3 to 5 lessons, make sure the central focus is the same, but the standards, they may differ. The objective to be achieved may be different across all the 5 lesson plans that you are planning to teach. For example, like this template. Remember, the template for the lesson plan you are not provided. No one is going to give you the template. You may decide to use one that is you are using in your current school you are teaching, or you may decide to formulate your own lesson plan. But in most cases, I advocate you use the lesson plan that you already have been using in your school. So you need to state clearly the objective to be achieved: language function, language demands, listening, speaking, and discourse. All of them, that's academic language demands. You need to highlight them well, very clearly. Then you need to talk about, for example, the classroom information. How many IEP students do you have? ELL. How many students are struggling? Low level, low achievers. You need to talk about them. Then talk about the adaptation, or how are you going to meet the needs of those students. If you have a fast learner student or gifted student, how are you going to address the needs? So you all need to have that in your lesson plan. As it goes down here, all these lesson plans, then you describe the lesson. How are you going to teach? Is there any prerequisite information or background knowledge that students require to have? Such kind of, which material are you going to use? Now, which theory are you basing your lesson? You need also to consider that. Then execute your lesson. The first minutes of the lesson, please make sure it is introduction. Introduce the students, breaking the ice. Introduce your student to the lesson. You can relate with a story, something familiar they are familiar with. Then from there, 10 to 20 minutes, make the discussion. Discuss, for example, this person was discussing story elements that are character, setting, plot, retelling, and so on and so on. Now, apart from that, you need to have questions that you are going to ask your students. Then close your lessons. At the end of the lesson, what are you supposed to do? Briefly explain, summarize the key aspects that you have taught. Then, apart from that, what are you supposed to do? Give out assessment. You can give exit ticket. You can tell students to do an assessment. But at the beginning of the lesson here, the first lesson, I'll recommend maybe you just tell the students to go read the next topic, or you can give them some blank copies of blank sheets of papers where they can describe their favorite character. Very simple task to do. Now, you build your lesson. Remember, this is a sequenced lesson. Sequenced lesson. So from lesson 1 to lesson the third lesson, all of them, they should have the same central focus. So all of them should be the same. For example, like this one, I only did 3 lesson plans. So that those are enough, and it is required, is a minimum requirement for edTPA assessment. Part C of task 1, it is instructional material. Here you are just supposed to take pictures of what materials are you going to use as you teach. For instance, in this example, I'm just going to scroll down as you see the materials that were used in this lesson plan. And remember, for ELL students, you need to provide the sentence frames to enable the students to communicate easily. So for this student, it was very, very important for the student to make sure he provided sentence frames. And of course, if you are doing reading of the story, provide a picture of the book. Part D of task 1, it is assessment. And here you are just supposed to provide blank copies of the assessment that you're going to give your student. Here you need to be very careful because you need to maintain confidentiality. Don't write the names of the students here, just in case the students have written their names here in this blank space that I've provided. Cover it up and write, for example, you can use letters, student A, student B, student C. As you analyze your data or you provide the feedback, you will use the letters as point of reference. In task 1, part D, there is no written assessment here. It's just blank copies. And I'm going to scroll down to show you an example of the same. Then apart from that, how are you going to mark the students' work? Provide the marking rubric for the assessment. Which criteria are you going to use to mark? For example, here, I only decided to use up to 5 points. Excellent means that the student achieved the 5 points. If the student is a low performer, I'll use improvement, that is 1 point. So you need to highlight them very, very, very keenly here, so that as you mark the work, as you assess the work, you ensure that you have considered this marking rubric. And to remind you, I'm just going to remind you something very, very important here. For instance, you may give assessment throughout your sequenced lesson, but as for me, I may recommend this. The lesson, out of the 5 lessons, 3 to 5 lessons, you will pick at least 2 or 1. Then you create an assessment of the lesson. That one, you'll use it as students' work samples, though it is my recommendation. But if you have time enough, you may decide to assess all the 5 lessons, then you upload them. Part E, of which it is planning commentary. Here you are just planning. After having all the data for task 1 part A up to part D, you can now plan your lesson to teach. Now, as you plan to teach, you are supposed to write the commentary. Now here, you remember in the lesson plan you are preparing, you need to provide the central focus. Describe it here in details. Ensure you give the level of which grade level are you handling. Ensure also to mention which lesson plan are you going to consider here. Then apart from that, you can also make sure you copy paste the standards here, the core standards, copy paste them here, so that when the assessor is reading your work, he is able to see which standards are you going to meet. Now, this part, that's the first part, that's central focus part, that's part A. Then part B, after you have described your central focus, then you are supposed to do what? Given the central focus, describe how the standard and learning objective within your learning segment will address the following. Remember, you are just planning, you are yet to teach. So how is it going to address the essential literacy strategy, related skills that support the use of the strategy, and reading and writing connection. Reading or writing connection. Remember, for this one, what are we handling? We are handling elementary education literacy with the mathematics task 4. Now, that part, of course, you have to either relate it. How will you address reading and writing connection? Look at the example here. Now, for this one, of course, it is reading. Through these students, for example, let's look at this aspect, this paragraph. Through this, students reading skills such as recalling, making references, and connecting events will have been developed throughout the learning segment, which is key to enhance essential literacy strategy. So here we expect that students will read, students will have to recall, students have to do inference, to recall what happened at a certain point in the story. So this, you need to write it in detail, and remember your work as you write this task 1 part E, the page limit is 9 pages maximum. It's not a must that you reach 9 pages, but make sure you be as detailed as you can, so that you can at least be 6 to 9 pages minimum. 6 to 9, which is 9 is the maximum page. Now fill all the details correctly, ensure that you explain correctly, and you fill all the parts correctly as required, bearing in mind what you already planned for in your lesson plans. So you also need to address here you need to make sure you have addressed all the needs in the lesson, the needs of the students in the lesson. Now, knowledge of the students to inform teaching. Here you need to know prior academic learning and prerequisite skills related to central focus. Remember, in our lesson plan, if in your lesson plan your students have to have at least a background information of on what they are going to learn. Use that to your advantage to develop the lesson. So you need to fill it here. Then apart from that, there is this part also, that's part B. You talk about the personal interest of the students, that is cultural, around the community there, community assets, which one are you going to use? For example, here, if the school is closer to the library, if for example, let's say some students have community library, use that to your advantage. You can say that you'll be giving students assignment so that they go home to the community library as they do their research. Personal interest. For example, let's presume as before your students go to bed, their parents give them stories. Relate that to what you're going to teach. Yeah, that one is very, very important aspect to highlight here. If the students have supportive parents whom they often come to school and check about their students, put it here. It's very, very important. Supporting students' literacy, how are you going to support them? And here you have to justify how your understanding of your students' prior academic learning and personal, cultural, and community assets. You need to consider that here at this part. I've just given an example here. You can back up your stories with the theories, such as you can, for example, zone of proximal development theory that is advocated by Vygotsky. It's a very good theory to discuss. Yeah. All right. Apart from that, you also need to describe the whole class here. Which type of describe and justify why your instruction strategy and planning supports are appropriate for the whole class. Remember, here they have categorically told you that you describe the whole class, individual, or group of students. As you answer this part, bear in mind the focus students. You need focus students. Bear in mind that the focus students, you are going to use them as students' work sample, at least 3 of them. So you need to remember that as you plan. Apart from that, you need also to describe common developmental approximations or common misconceptions that there is likelihood you can encounter. For example, in this for this student, teaching grade 3 students story elements, that is characters, setting, and plot, may arise a misconception affecting the key concept comprehension. One of these misconceptions that this student identified was the students may confuse between setting and a plot. You need to identify the misconception, and please, as you state the misconception here, how are you going to address the misconception? You also need to consider that. Apart from that, you're also going to look at the language function. Which language function are you expecting your students to use? Are you expecting students to interpret? Are you expecting students to analyze, to argue, to predict, to categorize? And remember, this language function, it should be used by students as you record the video in task 2. You need to bear that in mind. Now, here, identify the key learning task from your plan, lesson plans, of course, that provide students with the opportunity to practice using the language function. So you need to specify. And here, I consider, remember, you're going to record a video in task 2. Bear in mind that what you are going to put here, it should reflect on your video, so that it is seen that your students are practicing the language function you have chosen. Now, apart from that, you need to consider also the additional language it demands. You need to explain here in details as I've explained in that example. Look at it very carefully and look at something that you can grasp there. Apart from that, make sure you need also to do monitoring of your students. You need to monitor your students. You are supposed to, in response to prompt below, refer to assessment you will submit as part of the material for literacy planning task 1. Remember the materials that you planned, to the assessment that you are going to give your students. Describe how your plan formal and informal. Remember here, the key part is formal and informal assessment. Formal and informal assessment. Now, we'll provide direct evidence that students can use the essential literacy strategy to comprehend or compose a text and relate skills throughout the learning segment. Here you need to provide key information here. And as you plan, remember what you had already prepared for assessment. All right, here look, for example, in this example, I considered informal assessment here, whereby students will verbally describe their characters, something of the sort. Then formal, here, formal assessment, I expect students to do a test. For example, they can do an exit ticket exit. All right, and then apart from that, you need to explain how the design or the adaptations that you have chosen as you plan. Remember, that is in the contextual learning part A. What we did, that you have to explain how the adaptation that you plan to use during the assessment, how will it allow students to with a certain specific needs to meet their needs. You need also to describe that in this part. All in all, maximum number of pages should be 9, and it's not a must you reach 9. You can at least 8, 7, or maximum 9. Thank you for watching. I appreciate.